Weeks here, our theme verse is for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So Jesus talks a lot about money, more than he talks about heaven and hell. A third of the parables he told were about money, and he goes on and on. One out of 7 verses in Luke is about money. God wants us to know about this money stuff in our lives. That makes sense? So that's what we're focusing on. And today it's a renewal, a new start, a matter of the mind. Okay, we're going to think it through. We're going to think it through. By the way, you should have received a piece of paper when you walked in your little folder, and it's a fill in the blank. How many have a fill in the blank paper? Okay, I rarely do that, you guys, because I know that a lot of folks don't like to do that. But I really think it's a good thing today. All right, if you just take that out and plug in the fill in the blank as we go along, okay? Just have it in front of you. Pull out a hymnal if you want to. You got something hard to write on, all right? And just fill in the blank so you can take that home. Because I think that God, I'm going to mention this later, but God is the God of incarnation. Jesus stepped into our world. He became flesh and blood. And so he just doesn't talk about this stuff way out there. He brings it home in our lives. And that's what we're going to look at today. He brings us home so that our minds can understand his guide, huh? That's what's happening here. And so I want you to write these things down so you can take it home with you, okay? Money matters. Last week, we looked at the idea of vision. And the vision that everything comes from is this one. Go ahead. This one from Psalm 1. How we see ourselves with God. It says, blessed is the one he is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in due season. This is who we are in Jesus Christ, right? God comes to us in Jesus by his Spirit. He calls us to a relationship with God. And the picture he gives us in Psalm 1 is this beautiful picture that we're this strong, healthy tree, just flourishing, right? And our roots are deep into the water. And the water here can be looked at as Jesus, the water of life. Or many times in the text, the water is the Spirit of God, the ruach, the Hebrew word for wind, right? The ruach of God. And so we are well fed, we're well kept, we're kept healthy as our roots go deep into the water of life, and as the Spirit of God has his way in us. The Spirit of life, by the way, right? Adam, when he was created, God breathed in him the ruach of God, the Spirit of God. So this is where life is. Can you catch this vision of life lived with our roots, our soul deep into the water of life as the Spirit of God washes over us? So this is where that vision, then what does it mean? What does it mean to function as a disciple in that reality? And Jesus says, well, you give up everything. You become the salt of the earth by giving up everything for me, but then you have everything, right? Okay, so that's the vision. And at the depth of our soul, we all want that because, everything else is counterfeit, right? Am I lying? Everything else is finally counterfeit. And so this vision that God gives us to live in that, we said, okay, what does it mean? Well, what does that mean with respect to this money that God gives us? That's where we were. And the second vision was this one, the vision that God has for the whole world. And we looked at this Revelation text. After I looked in there before me, it was a great multitude that no one could count from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and in front of the Lamb. God's vision for the world is that all people might be his, and all people might know that wonderful relationship of being the tree with our soul deep in the water of life and the Spirit of God feeding us. That's the vision, every tribe and people and language. And that's been God's mission from the very beginning. In Isaiah, the Father says to the coming servant, the Son Jesus, he says, it's not enough that you save my people Israel, you're going to save the whole world too. And so God's vision has always been this vision, and to catch that vision and to receive this heart of God in our lives. That being salt of the earth means that we use everything we already are and have as we tie into the mission of Christ, the continuing mission of Christ in our world. He ascended to heaven, but he's still with us. And his mission continues through you and me and through all people. As we give up everything to be disciples, to be salt of the earth, that which preserves life on this earth, the life of Jesus Christ, right? And we tie in the reality that ground zero for this is always the ecclesia, the gathering of the people of God in local places. That's what church has always been, not an institution, not a building, but the people and the gathering of local people. This is ground zero for the mission. This is where it all happens. In our church body, the larger church body, it is never looked on as church. It's just looked on as something we can do more stuff when we bind together in this way. We can do more things out there, but that's never looked at as church. It's only advisory to the real church, this place. Local bodies of Christians, as they're living out the mission in their place, and as they're empowered and nurtured to live missional lives in their individual lives. So that's what we looked at last week. And if you left here, if you happened to be here last week, I acknowledge that we hadn't answered the question of how this plays out in our lives. The flesh and blood stuff. What does this look like? How do I do this type of thing? And that's kind of what we're going to look at today. That's why we have this theme today. Money matters, a renewal, a new start, a matter of the mind. Okay? A matter of the mind. God lays out what this looks like so that we can understand it with our mind. It's just not a feel. It's a reality of the mind that we can live in. And God meets us there. Huh? So that's what we're going to look at today, as he would give us this renewal as we understand, and as he fleshes out for us what it means to be the salt of the earth, as we give up everything to follow Jesus and work with him in his mission. I divided them up. I've got some umbrella principles here. You know what umbrella means? If sometimes you have an insurance policy that covers a bunch of stuff, right? So wherever you hurt somebody, you're covered, right? We have the umbrella stuff. So I've got some umbrella principle that just covers it in broad strokes of the brush. The first one is the grace of giving is for everyone. It is for you. You can fill in those blanks. It's on your paper, okay? The grace of giving is for everyone. It is for you. A couple verses I just want to share with you. The Old Testament goes like this. In Exodus, it says, "No one is to appear before me empty-handed." No one. In the New Testament, it's looked at from another way. It says this: each one of you should set aside a sum of money. So you can't get out of the fact that you're part of the no one and the each one, right? I mean, that's where we are. This has bothered me for a number of years. Statistically, again and again, we know, or we're supposed to know. I don't know if I don't want to believe it, but it's there. Statistically, like 50% of the people of a local body of believers give zero or very little to the work of the mission. And that bothers me, not because God needs our money. I mean, come on, he owns all the stuff, right? And he's going to do his thing. God's going to do his thing with or without us. It's that in this relationship with him, he wants to give us this gift of being a part of it. That's why giving is called the grace of giving, a gift that God gives us to be a part of it. When I remember I was a little boy. One of my earliest memories, my dad and my older brother were going to paint the fence that went around the front yard, and they let me help. All right? I didn't think they were going to let me help. I remember, it's funny, you have these thoughts you remember from when you were little, and they let me help. And you know how you painted everything that red fence color? You know what I mean? And my mom used to have, I couldn't find the picture after she died, but she used to have this picture, and I really got more paint on me than the fence. I guarantee I got more paint. And it was so awesome just to be a part of it. You know what I mean? That's what God's talking about here. And yet we forget this so easy. My son, Jeffrey, when he was, I think, a sophomore in high school, he had major knee surgery, and then he had to have major shoulder surgery the next year. And I remember I was outside working on the house. I had to put up some new siding. I had to paint it. And I just set aside this time. I think it was on a Friday afternoon or something. And he walks out, and I say, "What are you doing out here?" He says, "I want to help." I said, "What do you mean? I don't want to share your knee." I don't care, Dad. I want to help you. You see, I hadn't even thought about that. I had forgotten how good it felt for me to help. And we worked all day together. I still remember. It was a great day. It was warm. We worked hard. I got more paint on me than on the siding again, even though I was older. But it was a great day, you know? We forget. I remember when Jeff got his first real job. He's a nurse, and he had all these loan payments, student loans to repay. And yet he was still full-time here. He felt he was a member here. And so he started to tithe here He would give me a check to give to the church. And I remember saying to Jane, I think maybe he should, here's the pastor, right? This is how insidious it is. The pastor says, well, maybe you ought to pay off his loans first, right? Yeah. And I remember Jane looking at me, and she said, honey, this is good for him. It's the way it ought to be. It's good for him to give. He wants to be a part of things. He'll get the loans paid off. Isn't that amazing? I forgot. Good thing Jane was smart. Yeah. You see, it's a gift to be part of things. And that's the gift that God gives us here. It's not a gift of how much. It's a gift of being a part of it. And making a meaningful gift in your life. That's what he gives us here. Yeah, have you ever seen the big things on TV, the big concerts, the benefit concerts, right? And you got people performing up there that are worth like millions and millions of dollars, right? Why are they doing the concert? Why don't they just write a check? Because we're stronger together, and we can do more things together when every single one of us is a part of it. Isn't that right? That's what God calls us to in the church, for our good. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Umbrella number 2. Write this down. We give ourselves first to the Lord. Okay, so there's a little number 2. You give ourselves first to the Lord. We kind of alluded to this a little bit last week, but we give ourselves first to the Lord. Here's a verse. It says they gave themselves first to the Lord. And here's the context. I love this. This is what came before this verse, all right? This says they gave themselves first to the Lord. So what was the context here? What did their lives look like that they were able to do that? Here we go. It says, in the midst of severe trial, overflowing joy, which is a good thing because they knew Jesus, severe trial, overflow, and extreme poverty, they welled up in rich generosity. How the heck can you do that? Because they knew Jesus. They gave themselves first to the Lord. Isn't that what we do when we get married? We give ourselves to each other. And then everything flows after that. Even when you have hard times, you have the joy of having one another and being with one another. That's what this is talking about. We are called the bride of Christ. An overarching umbrella principle is that we give him ourselves. And then everything flows from that. In this Mark 12 passage, it shows us what it looks like. It fleshes it out. This woman who had 2 pennies, right? She gave them all. This is what it looks like. This woman was put in everything, all she had to live on. She gave herself to the Lord, and that's how it fleshed out. Wonderful gift, isn't it? To give yourself first to the Lord. Umbrella, principle number 3. Write this down. We give to God the best right off the top. Never leftovers, always first fruits. Never leftovers, always first fruits. Forgot something here. Yeah, okay, sorry. You remember in the Old Testament when God gave the manna to the children of Israel? How many remember that story? It's really pretty cool. They were in the desert. They were going to wander around 40 years, and they had no food. They ran out of food. So God said, I'll give you food. And every morning, they came out and they picked up this manna, right? Do you remember what happened if they said, well, we'll just pick up enough for 2 days so we don't have to work tomorrow? Remember what happened? It turned to worms. Remember? Yuck, huh? Yeah. What was God trying to teach them there? Yeah, he'd always provide, day by day. It's amazing because Jesus in the New Testament, he teaches us to pray and he says, give us this. Ooh, isn't that amazing how that goes together? Our daily bread. It's as if Jesus was the same God, Old Testament and New. Yeah, he probably was, huh? Yeah. This says, we give to God the best right off the top. You know why we don't do that? Because we're worried we won't have enough. That's what gets in the way there. We're worried that we won't have enough the next day. We don't trust him to give us the manna the next day. So we don't give it to him off the top. We give him leftover. You know, in the Old Testament, God, put that up for me. In the Old Testament, it says, bring the best of your first fruits to the house of the Lord your God. Think about this agrarian society, right? They were going to give at the very top the best of their very first crops. You think they had any insurance that they'd have any more? Maybe a hailstorm might come through, right? I was having dinner. I was on Vicarage in South Dakota. I was having dinner with this young farmer and his wife, and we were sitting there, and they were saying, "Yeah, we're going to get ahead this year. We got crops and fields, all going to be great." And as we were having dinner, the hailstorm came over. They had nothing. So it takes some faith to give first fruits off the top, right? But that's how God teaches us, fleshes it out in our lives, because He says, "Trust me, I'll take care of you tomorrow." First fruits. Right off the top. Never leftovers. After I take care of myself, we'll see what I got, huh? No. First fruits right off the top. Do I have another one up there for this? Yeah, go ahead. And in 1 Corinthians 16, on the first day of the week, again, at the beginning of the week, who knows how the rest of the week's going to go? We're just going to trust God. We're going to give to Him what we decided right off the top. Okay? It's a great way to live in this trusting relationship. It's a gift God wants to give us. All right, this is the last umbrella principle. The place for our thoughts to begin is the tithe. Write that in, tithe, T-I-T-H-E. But always within the context of the love of God. I think this is so important. God gives us, put the verse up first. We'll look at that, okay? Jesus, woe to you Pharisees, because you give 1/10 of your mint, rue, and all other kinds of garden herbs, but you neglect the justice and the love of God. So in the Old Testament, there was this law that God's people gave to Him off the top 10% of their income. And we always think that was the end. That was the end. But no, in the Old Testament, there were love offerings, there were thank offerings on top of that, from the heart. You had this law they lived under because God was teaching them to trust Him, right? But there were these things that happened after that, the heart stuff. And so when Jesus walked this earth and He was talking to the Pharisees, He says, woe to you, because you do the 10th stuff, but you're forgetting about love. This guide of the tithe, because no longer do we live under the law. It's not a 2x4 on our shoulders, but it's a place to begin our thoughts. It's a place to begin, never as if it's a law, a banging me on the head that I have to fulfill, but always in the grace of the Savior, starting there. And it's never a place where we end. It's never a place that when we are able to do that, we say, well, that's checked off. I'm done with my giving. It's just the beginning, see? He says, you're tithing, that's good, you should have done that. But your whole life, you're not living in justice and love. Your whole life is a life of living in that love and generosity. Tithing is a place for our thoughts to begin. It's for many of us, I think this and maybe some other points, it opens up a new paradigms, a new way of looking at things. And that's what this really does, because these paradigms are so antithetical to the place our sinfulness dwells in. I remember when Jane and I first started in the ministry, I was making considerably less than I had made 4 years earlier part-time at a grocery store. And now I've gone through 4 years seminary and I was a pastor, right? and I remember we talked, because there was a lot of kids that wanted us to buy Girl Scout cookies. And we talked and made the decision, we're buying Girl Scout cookies from everyone. Couldn't afford it. But it was one way we could show these kids that we loved them. Isn't that crazy? I mean, we had to really think about that, And then later on, when kids started to go on missions, high school kids, college kids, we said, okay, no matter what, we're giving $100 to any kid going on a mission. We're just going to do it. It was already a done deal. It was off the top, we're going to do it. We didn't worry about it. If we're going to have food the next day, we're going to do that. You see, paradigms work that way. You have to kind of push yourself into a new way of thought, into a new paradigm, and to start the way we think about giving to the Lord and to the ministry in this place, this idea, start with a tithe. It's like a new paradigm to at least begin to think in those terms. It's not easy, but in the grace of God, we can begin. I could tell you lots of stories where I'm the bad guy too, by the way. All right, honest, I could. We all struggle with this stuff. Okay. So now I have just two of these, okay? The brass tacks principle, because the umbrella stuff is like way out here, right? And the brass tacks are more like bang, bang, bang. Proportional, systematic giving. Here we go. Oh, did you fill that in? Proportional, systematic? You got that? Okay. On the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. So systematically, you see, this was on the first day of every week, systematically, right? We give out those little envelopes, right? And those are really good for me because since Jane died, I'm really not very systematic with anything. You know what I mean? And so those envelopes, they keep me in line. If I forget one Sunday, I'm staring at an empty envelope the next, when I come to I got to do it for 2 weeks today, right? They keep me systematic. We're trying to do more things online. When you leave today, you can have the opportunity to pick up a sheet that shows you how to give online because it helps us to be systematic, okay? Because God knows us better than we know ourselves, right? So systematic, on the first day of each week, there's a system there, isn't there? Right? On the first day of each week, each one of you should set aside, each one again. You see that? Each one? All right. You set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income proportionally. Proportionally, as God has blessed you. Well, what does that mean? We go to the next brass tack. Giving willingly and joyfully, thoughtfully and meaningfully. See, God's not going to let you off the hook to think through this stuff. And he's always going to call you to the heart reality. It says each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give. Not reluctantly or under compulsion, because God loves a what? Cheerful giver. See, we who have been touched and given the gift of this vision of life with Jesus, and we who have been touched by God's Spirit and have embraced the vision that God has for the world, it's a thing of joy. A thing of joy to give that might be fulfilled, to join Jesus in his mission. So God says, hey, it's got to be a thing of the heart. He always comes back to the heart. And you say, well, how do I figure that out? This is the next verse. Here we go. Whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly. And whoever sows generously will also reap generously. Meaningfully in your life. Because what you sow is what you reap. How many seeds you put in the ground is going to reflect how much produce you get, right? So as you struggle with this and wrestle with this, as you start with the tithe, as you think about it, as you rejoice that you're part of the mission, what does all this mean that you can joyfully and meaningfully and thoughtfully reflect in your life? That's what this is. I think this is a gift of God as well. He takes it out of the realm of saying bang. And he says, hey, I'll let you wrestle with it. I'll let you wrestle with your heart. It's a good thing to do. I'll let you wrestle with what's meaningful in your life. He gives us some promises with this. These promises, I don't mean to be disrespectful of God, but as I put the promises together, I thought, wow, this guy's a genius. I really did, because these promises touch the very places where we struggle. It's so interesting to me. I think one of the things we struggle with is, will I have enough? Right? You're going to have enough when you retire? You're going to have enough to put the kids through school? You're going to have enough for that new car when you need it? You're going to have enough for you lose your job tomorrow? You're going to have enough. We struggle with that, right? Rockefeller says, he said, when you get enough, he says, one more dollar. That's how we live sometimes, right? How do we ever know if we have enough? Isn't that right? God addresses that in his promises. He says this, God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God says to you, you're going to have enough tomorrow? and the next day, and the day after that. You're going to have enough. So that you can be a part of this gift of giving. And he drives his point home in a number of places, but here's another verse that says the same thing. You will be enriched in every way. You will be enriched in every way. That means you'll have more than enough tomorrow, right? You'll be enriched in every way so that you can be what? Generous on every occasion. What does that mean in your life? I don't know. You know, for Jane and I at one time, it just meant to be able to buy a stinking box of Girl Scout cookies, right? Sometimes it doesn't. Somebody's going to look at that and think it's not much. It means something different in every one of our lives. You'll be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion. Do you believe that? Now, I put one more promise up there, and I forgot to put on your card. Put down there verse 10. It's the same reference, just verse 10. So just put down verse 10, and I want you to see this. It says, He will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. I think God just is so brilliant here. You see, we doubt that what we do can make a difference. We doubt that what we give will be used for great things. Sometimes we doubt the people to whom we give it, right? We doubt whether it really matters. This is the promise of God. You give it, and He will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. He'll make it grow. He'll bring home a harvest. It has to do with God. It's a God thing. It's a promise. Do you believe it? Awesome promises as we look at these things in our lives. So, this week, receive anew God's vision of you, His mission, and our place in it. Prayerfully think about God's umbrella principles, brass tacks principles, and gracious promises through which He would empower you to live in wisdom with respect to money. Just think about it this week. Wrestle with it a little bit. It's God's gift to you. Amen. As we receive the offering today, if you've not yet filled out one of the connection cards, we would invite you to do so.